Guys, welcome back to another episode of the Ike Mma show. I'm joined in studio by kickboxing champion Yusuf Ali Taleb. Yusuf, how are you? Or is it Yusuf or Ali? I can't, which is the correct first name.
Yusuf is the first name.
I see.
Ali Talib is my
Okay,
surname.
I'm
Yeah, I'm doing
fine.
well. Thank you.
I think you agree with me that this interview there was in getting it scheduled because it was just crazy because my schedule was clashing with yours. You got so much going on. There's the upcoming fight. You got clients that want you to train them, and yeah, you got your fight coming to you also to take into account as well. So, thank you for taking the time out this afternoon to speak with me.
That's right. Thank you for having me. We finally sort of allowed
Yeah.
or got the schedules to work. So yeah, that's
Look,
good. It's a good session.
kickboxing champion, so you are no small figure. You're a big deal, clearly. So can you talk about that? Because you're not just a champion here in the UK, but also globally you're recognized as a big name in the sport.
Oh, I think well, thank you for saying so. I mean, I'm not one to blow my own trumpet as such, but I've been competing in kickboxing for a while. I've also been doing Muay Thai for a fair bit of time as well, and that's definitely where I'd say my skill set is. Thankfully, over the years, I've managed to acquire a few titles along the way as well, at various levels. So I think that's definitely my forte. I've been partaking in martial arts for the last 18, 19 years or so, competing in kickboxing in particular for the last 13, and now the new chapter is transitioning over to MMA. Now, with that, I've managed to fight on sort of all the top promotions in the UK, sort of fought around the world as well, and managed to do a bit of traveling, which is always fun. And yeah, so now new chapter, mixed martial arts, and we're going to hopefully bring
Yeah.
the skill sets which I've acquired over the many years
Yeah, of
onto the
course.
cage now.
I think kickboxing, as the title suggests, it's centered mainly around how you can throw your kicks and your punches. So I think the striking, your footwork, your kicks, your kick work, that won't be too much of a problem because I've seen that when you're throwing a kick, you've got to be able to throw the kick without losing your balance as well. That's one of the things I've seen some of the athletes do, and no, and that makes sense how you can throw the kick and not lose balance because if you throw the kick, got to try not to fall over, fall backwards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think balance is a common theme throughout all martial arts. You need to know and understand your balance so that you know how to manipulate it. And you're right, when you kick in, all your central mass is on one leg, which means that you need to have an understanding of your balance. Thankfully, although I've been doing kickboxing, that's the main thing I've sort of competed in for a while. I've actually trained Muay Thai for longer than I have kickboxing. It got to a point where kickboxing suited my style better at the time, so that's why I decided to do that. But realistically, the art of eight limbs is what I started off with. So Muay Thai. So thankfully, although I've got good kicks, good punches, where and worked well in the clinch, working with the elbows, the knees, and everything else. So I'd definitely say I'm not sort of your typical
Okay,
kickboxer.
can you? Well, I was gonna verge trying to go into some history, but your upcoming fights at the Immortal Championships up against Joe Bello, which I think it's for a title fight, isn't it? Is it? Yeah.
It's for the
Um,
British title.
can you talk about that as in going into that fight? How do you see things going, and what do you make of your opponent, Joe Bello? I mean, it's the first time I'm hearing of him. What do you make of your of him?
Mm. So I try not to focus too much on the opponent. In honesty, I've heard good things about him in relation to his style and the way he fights, etc. But I don't really put too much thought behind it because at the end of the day, fights are never always going to be what you see on in terms of their own fights or previous fights. I'd like to think everyone's developing. So the key thing for me is honestly improving my own game, my own skill set, and it doesn't matter to me in relation to who the opponent is. I just need to make sure I'm constantly improving. And that's what I've been working on since my last fight. My last fight was on the 10th of December. So it'll be 9 months to the day when I do compete again. And the reality is I've had fights scheduled and then they've been pulled out, etc. But that's neither here nor there. in that I got to a point where I was actually, do you know what? The only person who needs to improve is myself, and I'm going to continue to do that. Especially coming from the background I have done into the new sport of MMA. Naturally, there's always going to be improvements to be had, and that's where my focus has been, in all honesty. So in relation to my opponent, it's going to be a good fight. I've heard good things about him. It's clearly going to be a good caliber of a fight to be co-main event of the event itself, and for the title. So yeah, that's where my focus has been. Consistently sticking to the training plan and improving all the
You've
time.
never okay, you've heard of Joe Bello. Have you heard of him or seen have you met him before? Okay,
No,
you never
never
crossed
met him.
paths
Never
with
met him.
no
No.
trash talking animosity at all. Okay.
No, no. For the most part, there hasn't been. Never had a conversation. Hopefully, he's a decent guy, and we get to have a bit of a catch up and chat after the fight. I don't necessarily see. I mean, in MMA, there seems to be a lot more of the trash talk and everything else, building up a fight. In all honesty, it's when you get to, and at least sports entertainment, I guess once you get to like the levels of the UFC and the other promotions of there, there's a bit more entertainment involved, I guess. So I can see there being some additional benefit of doing so once you're there, or building up along the way. But for the most part, it's like me and Joe, we're going to fight. No one actually cares whether there's going to be any insults thrown either way. In honesty, it's going to be a good fight regardless. And there isn't going to be an added anticipation if anyone is throwing insults this way and that. For the most part, we're going to fight. We're scheduled to fight on the 10th of September. It's going to be a good fight. Let's just get going with it, basically. That's just my thoughts. I know a lot of people like to build up a bit of hype, but I like to, for the most part, do a lot more
Exactly.
talking.
Yes. I mean, say what you like to sell the fight, or during the pre-fight press conference, say what you like, or do whatever it is to sell the hype. But what people to really take away, what will actually sell to the score, will be what happens in the actual fight itself.
Yeah, I agree.
It's the first time of me speaking to you properly, in depth. Can you just give us as in a brief backstory on your history and really what enticed you, as in got your attention to combat sports and delving further into kickboxing and now mixed martial arts?
So I started age 11, age 12, 11, going into Muay Thai when I first started. I was taken down to the first class along with my siblings by my parents, and we're just sort of taken to class. It's going to be good for our discipline and fitness and keeping us active and out of trouble. Growing up in Hackney, so that was quite useful. And I just continued to sessions. When I first started, there was never really, especially at the beginning, it wasn't an ambition to be like, oh yeah, I'm going to pretend into a fight or whatever else. Just took to it sort of like a duck to water as such after a load of hard work, and then realized actually I enjoy it. I've always been really competitive, so it was a natural fit to be going into that. Now, growing up, it was more of, especially amongst my friend circles, speaking about mixed martial arts and MMA a lot more than sort of standard Muay Thai and kickboxing since like late 2000s. So I've always had an interest in MMA, and I've found that, yeah, I've been naturally drawn to it. And I always thought I would compete in mixed martial arts, but I've managed to sort of fall into Muay Thai and kickboxing, and I continued to compete at that level. Once I got to a good level, it was sort of a no-brainer as just continue doing it because it ticked off the bug of wanting to compete in combat sports. So I was doing that. And each time I stopped to do a bit of grappling training or anything else, it then took a bit too much away from my actual sessions. So I decided to continue with that. And yeah, then there was a bit more of a natural break in sort of the progression of my career, and I decided to switch over for mixed martial arts.
It's quite interesting. A lot of the people I've spoken to who are like yourself, they're athletes or they're affiliated with combat sports in one way or the other. They said that it was through their own doing, sort of, that they actually found an interest for it, and their parents usually found out later on, and their parents weren't always happy about it. But in your own case, your parents actually, they sent you, that they, as in, brought you to the fight scene, if I could say that, and they got you involved.
Yeah, Yeah, essentially. Well, martial arts has always been sort of part and parcel of my parents' lives. It's a natural fit. Keep us entertained. I think martial arts in general would be consistently breed good attributes in people. I think being consistent, disciplined, hardworking, focused, and all the other sort of cliched attributes. So I think it was a natural fit, and I think more people, particularly these days, are understanding that from the parents' perspective. So more time than not, we're getting a load more sort of kids joining into various classes, and I think it's good
I
for
have
the
to
next
say, I mean,
generation.
I've trained with you before a few times. I have to say that I do find it very therapeutic on the bags with your kicking or throwing punches because if you had not such a good day or week or whatever month, once you've done just an hour or whatever it may be, pads, going in the bag, kicks, whatever, you feel a lot calmer, a lot more. You just vented off all that frustration and rage out on something. So yeah.
Yeah, I think it could be quite therapeutic. You're right. I think physical activity is a great outlet in general, regardless of what it is, but in particular, martial arts. So I think that's why people are going. I find it to be quite useful now. As adults, we've been taking the kids to it more time than not. Kids may not necessarily have an understanding of their body just yet, and their overall physical mental health. But I think it's quite useful, and I think a lot of adults who aren't necessarily competing or fighting find that to be the case,
Mhm.
and that's why they continue to do it because it's a good physical push. You learn a new skill, and it's a nice way of venting, which means by the end, as you said, usually a lot calmer and just a bit more of a chilled
Yeah,
sport.
absolutely. Um, you clearly have achieved a lot of success, significant levels of success in the sport. What would you say you owe that to? Would you say it's a great team behind you, or just you as an individual? You've always been mentally resilient and tough, and you've just kind of taken and bared anything that's just come along the way to make sure that you've persevered to make sure you come out successful the other side.
Well, I think it's going to be a blend of a few variables really. The fact that I've remained consistent throughout is partly down to myself, which is good. That I was consistently working hard. The other aspect relating to that is having a consistent team around me who's been able to support me throughout, my sort of journey in kickboxing and in just in general life really. So I've been at Bloodline Gym since its opening in 2005. And you've got Paul Marut, who's the owner of that gym, who's been my head coach since. So there's going to be an element of that naturally, as well as the other members of the team who've been consistently around for that many times. Who, if at a point I'm not necessarily at the gym, or in the past I haven't been, they're like, "Why aren't you at the gym?" So they're going to consistently get it until it is embedded within the routine, especially at the sort of mid-teens age. It's quite easy to be distracted and go off with your friends and do X, Y, and Z, right? So you need the support of people around you. You need a team to be able to get you back into the gym and keep you there in a sense, so you can continue to learn. Because the only way really to improve is consistently working at something. So there's going to be an element of that. And in terms of the success, it's just having the people who've been there and done it. So in terms of Bloodline Gym itself, all the coaches there are fighters or have been fighters. So you've got lots of people who've come before me who have learned from their own experiences and pass on their knowledge, good and bad. So then I can then do the same and then pass it on to the next generation after that. So then we don't need to make the same mistakes over and over. I think it's really important to have, in my opinion, people who've already done what you're trying to achieve in a sense. Because in a sense there isn't a direct blueprint, but there is some sort of plan in place as to where you want to get to, and you've seen it being done. So I think it's, to answer your question, a few different things. One, an element of consistent hard work throughout the years. Two, having the right team around you. I know a lot of people jump from gym to gym, but I think you can only really improve long term anyway, and consistently, if you have a solid team around you. I think I found that early on in 2005. Really.
I know you've kind of started speaking about the Bloodline Gym, but can you elaborate a bit more on the gym itself and the brand? Because you say you've been there since 2005. That's now, I mean, 2025 isn't too far away. So it's like 20 years, you would have been a figure, a permanent
Yeah.
figure of that particular brand and gym. And I've spoken to, it will be no, not just you, but is it Phil Casper or so, the other kickboxer. Both of you are
Yeah.
champions, very, very successful. I mean, and there was another athlete there who I should have spoken to, but it just hasn't happened. A Polish fighter. His name begins with S. But I mean,
Mhm.
the gym has clearly produced
Mhm.
some very successful athletes in combat sports, not just mixed martial arts or kickboxing, but various disciplines of the sport. Can you just talk about, just elaborate further on
Mhm.
the gym itself? I mean, um, is it that a lot of the head coaches and instructors there have been fighters themselves? Is that what really makes it, so good, or are there other aspects and other elements of it as well?
Well, yeah, as you said, it's been open since 2005, and that's when I first started coming to the gym. I was actually doing Muay Thai prior to that the um, at the other gym, which was KO in Bethnal Green. Now, I was there for a short period of time. However, in terms of you looking at the history and the roots, Paul Marut, who's the owner and head coach at Bloodline Gym, also was training there previously. So that's where his roots come from. And again, he was training with good people, and again, historically was able to do that. So he came over and started from the beginning in a sense. Now, it took a while to be able to build up a good reputation, to consistently build good fighters. Um, but then it's the fact that he was already competing at a good level, and then he started from the grassroots in a sense. And now everyone who's there, you mentioned you had Phil Casper there, and then you had the other fight he was references was Camo. Camo's surname begins with an S. You have Arnold Borotov, who again fighting at a really good level, and it then put the gym on the map in a sense. But I think it's the fact that you had Paul investing his time and efforts into all these fighters, and then you can see the whole team growing together. And now Bloodline Gym is a sort of well-renowned gym all over the UK as well as the world, because again, you've got people who fought over the years in various places. Essentially, you get a global and you put a pin in it, and more likely than not, a Bloodline representative has fought in that part of the world. So I think it's the fact that you had the coaches putting in the effort, the coaches have already been there, and the teammates pushing each other to continue and consistently grow.
No, I other people who I've also trained with, you may not know their names. Does the name Charles Lee ring a bell to you? Ring a name to you? Ring a bell, sorry. Yeah.
Charles Lee. No, but potentially a face may be familiar. He's been in sort of the scene. Or
Well,
what gym
he
is he training
trains
from?
at the gym box in Holborn, but he does train quite a few people in the nearby park, the Lincoln Inn Fields near Holborn Station in central London.
Okay. I do not, but I'm guessing he's part of Team Two, given
Poss
that he's part of Jimbo,
Possibly. Would you
potentially. And if that's the case, then I
would you
would
know Lee
probably
Murray?
recognize his face.
The mixed martial arts fighter Lee Murray, yes.
Lee Murray.
You
No,
don't,
no, I do not. Um,
I
no,
see.
I may have come across him in a sense. Definitely a lot more familiar with more the particularly UK
Okay.
Muay Thai and kickboxers. And I'm now going into the world of MMA and become more familiar. Lee Murray, I don't think I've seen any of his stuff.
No,
But
he is
why do you mention
someone
him?
who you may not know him, but what happens was that he is a very, very good but dangerous mixed martial arts fighter. Not dangerous as in he's a bad person. No,
Okay.
he's not a bad person, but he is in the cage that he's as in you would not like to be his opponent. He's a very good fighter. There's something that happened. It was in about 2006 that he was an incident he was involved in, and he's currently serving sentence in Morocco. So I think there is a campaign for him to be released from jail, to be pardoned, and for him to be allowed to come back to the UK. Um, so I mean, if you Google him on Google, I think his name will come up because I think his name is quite unique in combat sports. Anyway, I don't think there's anyone answering that similar name anyway. It's quite a common name, but in terms of mixed martial arts here in the UK anyway, I don't think it's that uncommon.
Okay.
But no, that's the reason why I brought this up, because I can see that combat sports, particularly mixed martial arts here in the UK, it was well connected. Athletes may know this coach, may know someone else, you know. So I was quite surprised that the family's quite tight in that sense. Um,
Mhm.
but
Yeah.
moving on, fight camp, your upcoming fight, just how are preparations, and for you, any other fight, how would you normally prepare for that?
Um, I mean, fight camp's going well. It's a process. Is naturally I've been getting ready for the fight. In fact, my training hasn't really changed much since my last fight in November. I've been consistently training twice a day, and on the weekends as well. So it's like, getting the recovery in, but for the most, I'm just consistently improving and looking to improve. As the fight gets a bit closer, the intensity of the session sort of increase a little bit, but for the most part, I've been through a fair few fight camps in the past. So I just quite understand that it's just part of the process. The good days, the bad days, the hard sessions, the lighter sessions is all sort of part of it, really. And regardless of what's going on, I just try to stay consistent to the plan. That way I don't need to think about anything else. Like, I know what I'm doing on a Monday, I know what I'm doing on a Wednesday, 2 months down the line for the most part. It's got a regular routine, and I'm consistently improving and looking to improve and work on various things.
What's been the hardest part for you? Is it making weight? Because I've seen you, I've trained with you. You always seem to be someone who's always in shape. So I'm guessing that the weight class that you've got to come in within that range, I'm sure. Are you currently meeting it, or do you still have to cut the weight to probably even build up to the weight? I mean, have you had to make weight for this fight? I should ask.
So this fight is at 73 kilos. It's a catch weight. Given that in MMA you have
I see.
70 kilos and 77 kilos as the two weight classes. There isn't anything in between. In Muay Thai and kickboxing, there's a lot more weight divisions. There's a lot more flexibility, in that you have your 72.5s, your 75s, your 77s, your 70 kilos. So there's a few more weight categories between all of them, which just means I need to find the right spot, really. Like, a lot of my later kickboxing fights, for the most part, were always at about 72.5 kilos. I had a few at 75, a couple at 70 as well. So just floating between them. For the most part, I mean, I appreciate you saying I'm in shape all year round. I train all year round, so I try not to blow up too much, depending on when the fight is. But for the most part, I'm always training, always trying to stay strong, stay fit, stay healthy. And yeah, so this one's going to be at 73 kilos, which just means we're sort of in between the 77 and the 70
Okay.
kilo mark.
Oh, that's it was good to see, good to hear that everything is on point. Because I mean, I've never been in a official fight myself, so I never had to cut down my weight so drastically. Um, which is why I asked. I mean, I've heard some stories of people who have gone as far as to lose so much weight and fat that, I mean, I've heard that they can actually feel their brains vibrating in the scalp because they've lost that much weight. The calorie deficit has been that severe.
I think weight cutting in itself, or even losing a dramatic amount of weight in general, probably isn't the healthiest of things. Now, the irony, or in some ways, of or the oxymoron of my life as such, is the fact that doing my day job, as well as doing PTs and one-to-ones for martial arts, I'm a physiotherapist. Hence the name, the fighting physiotherapist. And there's a few things that happen in the sport, in particular weight cutting, which will go against, in general, most recommended healthcare advice. In general, but it's a practice that's part of the sport, which means as a fighter, you accept that and you then go over and you make it as safe as possible. But you're right, there probably have been people who've passed out. There's been people who can, really be in a significant deficit and not really be feeling very well. But I think progression of science, we are now understanding the safer ways of cutting weight, just to make sure that we can, as fighters, be as healthy as possible. I think in general, if there was ever a point in the combat sports sort of realm where there wasn't any weight cutting at all, I think we'd see a lot of fights have a different outcome more time than not, because again, weight cutting is a huge variable that takes place versus someone's walk around weight. Now, some people are better at cutting weight than others, down to a number of other factors. So I think if there was no weight cutting at all, I think some fights would end differently, regardless of the level of fighting, whether it's totally grassroots or even in the likes of UFC, ONE FC, etc. Now, I know ONE FC have their hydration clause or their hydration, but even then you can see now there's a fair few ways of getting past it in relation to utilizing science. So it's not really it's a deterrent, but I think there's ways around it. From what I've seen in relation to nutritionists and other people who work with the fighters, there, they've shown various ways of how to pass their hydration test, which essentially is knowing how much, how dehydrated their urine is.
You know, I have to point out, and I hope you don't mind me saying, for someone who is a mixed martial arts fighter, but no, that shouldn't actually mean anything. But my next question was to ask you, with all the success you've achieved and what you're doing, all the ventures and the businesses that you have that you're doing, and the titles you have on your belt, what future plans do you have? Because I was even thinking, at some point, would you like to go into commentary for sports, even if it's just for the more local scenes? Because you speak quite well. You speak quite fluidly and complete sentences, quite articulate.
Thank you. I appreciate you saying so. Fight is something I've considered in the future, potentially. Right now, my main focus realistically is, especially with fighting, the goals with fighting is, I think, getting to the highest level of sport. Now, in my opinion, if you are fighting in mixed martial arts, you should be aiming for the highest promotions. And currently, that would be the likes of UFC, PFL is doing really big things at the moment, ONE FC, etc. All these sort of big names. And I think if you aren't necessarily aiming for those things, then I would personally be questioning what I'm doing myself in the sport. Now, after that, in terms of post-fight career, I'd definitely consider doing a bit more of commentary or analytical work, because I do enjoy breaking down fights, although I don't necessarily do it on an official regular basis, because most people have tendencies or habits, and a lot of the time they come out in the fights. So saying who's going to do this, who may do that, is quite fun. I do enjoy it. So potentially later down the line, doing a bit of commentary work or analytical work could be quite useful, actually, and I would enjoy doing it.
Because I'm glad it's something to think about, because you have not just the voice but the face for it as well. You look the part, you sound the part. So I was thinking that's something to possibly consider for the future.
Thank you.
That's I'm very happy to hear that. And as someone who's been in the sport for some time, for a long while, I mean, you've been part of Bloodline for nearly 20 years. What advice would you like to give for any younger fighters who are coming onto the scene?
Advice for younger fighters. The key thing is be consistently training. A lot of the time when people start something new, they have this thing of, this week I'm going to train 5 times, and then I'm going to train 5 times, and then I'm going to train 5 times, when they're just starting out. It takes a while to be able to build up the body's resilience, and more time than that, if you don't do that, you're going to be injured by week 3, week 4, which means you're going to end up taking a week off. Now, and then you're not going to consistently improve. Whatever number you're setting in relation to sessions you're having, make it consistent, make it achievable. That way you're going to see the long-term results. We've got the likes of Faraz Zahabi, who is quite famous for saying working at a 70% sort of intensity or sort of work rate, you're going to achieve a lot more by the end of the year versus someone who's doing 100% sessions twice a week versus someone who's doing 70% sessions 4 times a week. You know, you're going to achieve a lot more by the end of that year just because of the amount of output. Now, realistically, to improve with anything, you just need to be, well, a number of things, but one key factor is that you're putting in the time and the effort to continue to improve. So that'll be the first bit of advice. The next bit would be just be to have an open mind in relation to learn. You should be able to learn from everyone, especially when you are new. But I feel like even as a veteran, you should also have an open mind in relation to learning, because you can learn from everyone. And I feel like if you get to a point where you feel like you know everything and you can't learn anymore, I think that's probably time for you to pack in, because you are now going to stunt your own development. You should always be willing to learn and grow as a fighter, because no one knows everything. You know? And so there is that. And the fact is, the sport, or it's always developing. So there's always going to be something to learn. You know? And even if that means you're working on the fundamentals again and again and again. You know? But those are probably 2 key things I'd say. Have an open mind and consistently train.
Yeah.
Find a good team as well. Just to add another one in there. Find a place where, again, in my opinion, people have done what you want to be achieving. That way, you know it's achievable because they've already done it, and they will hopefully have the experience to tell you what to do, what not to do, based off of that.
I was going to ask you, what do you think of the current state of the mixed martial arts scene, well, of the combat sports scene in the UK? Because there are plenty of talented fighters here, and the one thing that I don't like is that in comparison to the American scene fight in the US, you've got the bigger brands of the promoters, UFC, PFL. You got the Cage Warriors, which that's based here in the UK. But what I'm really pinpointing is that there's a lot of talented fighters, a lot of really entertaining shows, but they do not get the same exposure. You know, I don't hear about it all over YouTube or Instagram like you would do if someone's forced in the UFC or in a PFL. And then there's some really, really talented and really, really good shows that I put on here in the UK and in neighbouring Ireland as well.
I think you're right. There are a lot of talented fighters in the UK. I think the fact that the UFC is originally a sort of American promotion, naturally you're going to hear a lot more about American fighters, given that it's based over there. Similar thing with PFL, I believe that's where it originated, and that's they're going to have a lot more exposure going on there. Now you're also going to have a lot of feeder promotions who will have a lot more recognition based off of that as well, because they're quite close to home in a sense. And you got the likes of, and you're getting a bit more now, but for example, you have LFA, which is the American promotion, is quite commonly mentioned and referenced in the UFC commentary, as an example. But I think that's, although it's a good promotion, and I think people have come out from there, it's more of a regional show, and I think the fact that it's close to home and there's been a lot of fighters from LFA who've gone over to the UFC, I think that's why it gets its recognition. It's doing the right thing in producing great fighters. The UFC recognize it, so they're going to reference it. And I feel like in Europe or even in the UK, Cage Warriors seem to be especially historically, the feeder promotion towards the UFC. And there aren't any, it doesn't seem to be any others who are directly in conversation, have good links in relation to that. And that's probably why we don't really hear much else from it. But again, good talented fighters, but I think having the next step planned, or having the ability to go onto these bigger promotions is improving now. But I think historically that hasn't been the case. You have PFL who are doing really good things in that they now have a PFL Europe. I believe they've had 2 shows this year. They're having 3 shows within Europe this year. So I guess they're starting off at the more regional level, seeing really good talented fighters, and then trying to progress them through their own system. Now you have the like of Dan Hardy, who's always keeping an eye on it and plays a role as a scout for PFL, particularly PFL Europe. So I guess there's good within the sport, and that's probably why in future we'll probably hear more about these young and up UK who are 5-0, 6-0, however much, or because essentially I think there is the gap missing. Whereas in America or some other countries may not necessarily have that. But again, you have the likes of Octagon, who's also trying to do a very similar thing.
Yeah.
I think it depends on the goal of the promotion and where they want to sit themselves on the global landscape. I think you've had, again, from my limited understanding and maybe a newcomer, it seems that LFA, as an example, as I referenced them before, or even CAGEWARRIORS to a degree, they're growing, they're expanding, they're building good talent. But I don't think they've ever, I don't know, correct me wrong, ever want to be competing with the likes of UFC or ONE FC in a really competitive develop. I think they see themselves as a really good feeder promotion to the next level. So they're not really actively trying to compete with that. And I think if that's the case, you're going to get the likes of the UFC who will continue to back them, which is why they're on UFC Fight Pass, etc., etc., and always reference are in the commentary based off of that. So I think it just depends on who the promotion are, what they're trying to achieve in terms of their long-term goal, and whether they're in or trying to be in direct competition with the bigger organizations, which is always going to be tough to compete with given the amount of capital that they have anyway.
Yes, yeah. No, and one of the annoying things that I don't like about, especially with the UFC, is that they always seem to try to capitalize on the hype building up to the fight. Whereas over here in the UK, at least let's say with the smaller scenes anywhere you go to in the world, but mainly in the Western parts of of the world, they do tend to focus on, they may be hype, but people will also remember there's also fighters also we're really going to take away what happens inside that ring or the octagon. Whereas with the UFC, they just capitalize on any kind of controversy that's happening before that fight. Now that's like what they're trying to sell to you.
Well, I think with the UFC, it's again, as we said earlier, it's sort of sports entertainment. So I'd like to think if you get to the UFC, you can fight at a good standard and a good level already, right? So I think at that point, a lot of the fighters are trying to differentiate themselves from the 500 other people on the roster. So they need to create some bit of noise. And now if everyone can fight, and if you're looking at the word sports entertainment, if everyone can do well at the sport, the next bit is how well you can do at the entertainment aspect. And everyone's going to have their own stick or their own way of doing things. But I think that's where they're trying to do it. And from the UFC's perspective, they are looking at trying to build, or anyone who can generate some sort of revenue or income for them, they're trying to push that. Because at the end of the day, they're going to be looking at the bottom line. So they're coming from a business perspective, and the fighters are coming from a sort of sport perspective more time than not. I think the middle ground between the two is the entertainment aspect. So I think the UFC will latch onto anything that they can to boost revenue sales, which is why you're going to get all of any sort of controversy they will push. Because at the end of the day, it then gets more eyeballs on it, more people interested, which eventually will mean that more people are tuning in, whether that's to pay a pay-per-view, whether that's to watch the Fight Pass or anything else, which eventually means that they're getting more income by the end of the day. And again, it's a two-way thing. I think the fact that the UFC is pushing X fighter is beneficial to the fighter in themselves because it helps to build their profile and hopefully then projects the career in the right direction. Because at the end of the day, I think you need to have, I think you're going to be the best fighter in the world, but if you're not really marketable, then the UFC may not necessarily, or any other promotion may not necessarily be behind you.
I do find that to be very, very unfair and really, really annoying. Because really, first and foremost, and I've heard this so many times from many people I've spoken to and interviewed, just because they didn't have the right look about them, they were denied the opportunity of no, it wasn't, as in representing a boxing, as in they won a boxing match or so, but I think it was to be the face of the boxing champion for a country they're supposed to be representing for the Olympics or Junior Olympics. This is something that someone told me before, but just because they didn't have the right look, they chose the next person who probably didn't have enough wins under their belt, probably enough experience, or hadn't fought enough tough opponents in comparison to them, but because they looked the part, they chose them over the other person. And I think that's extremely unfair. You're only getting by because of how you look, not because of your own hard work or your talent. It's very
Yeah,
unfair. Mm.
I think I'd have to agree with you with that. I think that's one of the downfalls or pitfalls of society in a sense. You know,
Yeah, yeah,
at the moment, particularly these days in terms of living, we're not necessarily, you know, there isn't a meritocracy in play at the moment. It's more time than not necessarily about what you've done. Sometimes it is going to be in the element of what you look like or what else you bring to the table. In that sense. Now, I do think that everything should be based off skills, but unfortunately, we don't necessarily live in that world. So, from the promoter standpoint, they're trying to tick off as many of the boxes as possible. In that, can this person fight? Can this person draw and bring in eyeballs? And can this person be in front of the camera? Because at the end of the day, if they can do a number of those things and other things, from the promoter's perspective, they're like, all right, well, then they're probably going to be making some sort of money for the company or the promotion.
yeah.
So you're right, it's not fair. But I think that is unfortunately, particularly with the sort of social media that we have going on at the moment. I think that's just part of the current society we live in.
Yeah.
And I say current society we live in because I'm sure there are potentially other parts of the world that's not necessarily the case. What parts, I don't know. But I'd like to think that we aren't the only society in the world, really. You know?
You have given me very detailed answers throughout this whole conversation. that's what sets our time for you because I really want to pick your brains. Last but not least, any shout outs you want to give to anyone?
Well, in terms of shout outs, I mean, continuous and shout outs to my team. So you have, again, Paul Maroot from Bloodline Gym, as I mentioned, and all the other sort of training partners who are at the gym. Don't really want to start naming everyone because then I'm going to consistently forget some people. But, you know, everyone at Bloodline Gym as such, the key people who are always going to be there and always have been there would be Phil Casper, as you've referenced, Arnold Boratov. But again, you've got a load of other people who are good fighters, upcoming fighters, good teammates, and good friends. I think there's a good camaraderie around the gym. So I think everyone plays a really important part in everyone else's journey. So we're thankful to the Bloodline team, and that also includes all the members of the gym who aren't necessarily fighters as well, because they will often come down to support. They will often come down, be in the session and encourage people from the sidelines, encourage myself, going through the tough sessions, etc. So I'd definitely say a big shout out to the Bloodline team. And also I'd like to shout out my other team, which I haven't referenced to this point in the interview, is my MMA team, which is Great Britain Top Team, GB Top Team, run by Brad Pickett and Ashley Grimshaw. So again, two sort of pioneers and vets in the sport who have been there, done it. I'd like to sort of follow in their footsteps in that regard. And all the teammates who are there consistently helping me improve all aspects of my MMA and allow me to sort of come into the world with. So two key people or two key groups and teams I'd like to thank: Bloodline Gym and GB Top Team.
Just before we round up, can you just remind people of your next upcoming fight? I mean, unless if you want to wait a little bit, then that's okay.
No, that's fine. So my next fight is going to be on the 10th of September. So that's it's not long. 10th of September 2023. It's going to be on Immortal Champions. We'll be fighting Joe Bello for the British title. So do come down to that if you're local. It's going to be in London, in Portchester Hall. I haven't fought in London in a bit of a while, so definitely come down to that.
I'll definitely try and, if I get some time off work, because that's more likely going to be, is it Friday or Saturday? The 10th.
It's actually a Sunday. It's a Sunday, which is pretty odd. I fought on a Sunday in the past. Most fights are on a Friday or Saturday. But yeah, this is going to be a Sunday evening. I don't know the time I'll be fighting yet, but I will be pretty late on, given that I'm the co-main event of the show. So I think the show starts potentially 3 o'clock. So I'm guessing I'll be on anytime 9, 10-ish. but we'll find out closer to the day.
Yusuf, thank you so much for coming on the show. I feel like I've learned a lot from you, almost like when you speak, like an encyclopedia about the sport. Thank you so much for coming on.
No, there's plenty for me more to learn and to know, but I appreciate you saying so. Thanks for having me on the show as well.
Thank you, guys. If you did enjoy the podcast, if you listened and watched as far as you have, please don't forget to leave a like. Don't forget to subscribe. You can also catch the podcast on other audio platforms, the major ones, Spotify, iTunes, and Google Play. Yusuf, once again, thank you so much. Thank you. Take care.